Welcome to my complete metagame guide for the 2025 post-rotation standard format in the Pokemon trading card game. In today's video, we're going to cover everything you need to know about this metagame that's coming up for April 2025, including cards to know about, staple cards that are going to be included in a myriad of different deck archetypes, Japanese tournament results and some of their metagame, and then 4 different tiers of decks, which will include 16 deck archetypes, 30 different deck lists, and 2 deck skeletons for the Tier S decks. So beginning with cards that we need to know. These are going to be impactful cards that hold a lot of value on the board or are doing very strong things that you need to know about. So starting with Noctowl. Noctowl has the ability Jewel Seeker. Once during your turn, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, if you have a Tera Pokemon in play, you could search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards. So there are a lot of strong Tera Pokemon, and we'll start looking at Noctowl paired with Tera as immediately as the Tier S decks, which will be the first categorization of decks that we look at in today's video. Noctowl being able to just evolve a stage 1 and search for 2 trainer cards. That's items, tools, supporters, stadiums. You could search for anything with this Jewel Seeker ability. And if you have more than one Hoot available to evolve, you could even use multiple of these Jewel Seekers in one turn. Next is Lily's Clefairy EX, which is a new card from Journey Together, and the ability Fairy Zone says the weakness of each of your opponent's Dragon-type Pokemon in play is now Psychic. So this is really strong against Dragapult EX and also against Raging Bolt EX, but namely against Dragapult EX since that's a card that has 320 health and no weakness. Now this Lily's Clefairy EX can pose as a really massive threat to Dragapult EX and, like I said, other dragon decks such as Raging Bolt. Next we have Budew, which is a 30 HP basic Pokemon, and it has that free attack Itchy Pollen, so it costs 0 energy to use this attack. It does 10 damage, and during your opponent's next turn they can't play any item cards from their hand. So it's important to know about this card because if your opponent starts with Budew or you come to learn what kind of decks include Budew in their deck lists, you can preemptively play your item cards if needed for cards that you might need next turn. So this is a card to play around and prepare for. And then Wellspring Mask Ogerpon EX. So there's actually 2 reasons why I'm talking about this card in this section. So first, it has the attack Sob. During your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon cannot retreat. So that is an effect that you might have to play around sometimes, either by not benching a Pokemon that could get easily locked in the active without a good attack to use, or you might be changing the way you're building your deck because of this. Maybe you add a Switch or a Professor Tauros into your deck to get around that Sob retreat lock. And of course, the torrential pump attack on this Pokemon, you may shuffle 3 energy attached to this Pokemon into your deck, and then this also does 120 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So it does 100 to the active and 120 to the bench. That can start the game off with 2 quick prize cards, especially impactful against evolution decks when you just have your little guys out there like Charmanders or Ralts or Dreepies. This Wellspring Mask Ogerpon's torrential pump can be very scary. So 2 attacks to make sure you know about on that Wellspring Mask Ogerpon. Monkey Dory's Adrenabrain is surely going to be an impactful ability in the post-rotation standard format. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon has any dark energy attached to it, you may move up to 3 damage counters from one of your own Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So this is good because not only does it heal from your own Pokemon, it damages your opponent's Pokemon. So this can be used to get around effects like Pikachu EX's Resolute Heart that says if this Pokemon's at full health and would be knocked out, it survives with 10 HP. You can get some little sprinkle damage with the Adrenabrain so that effect doesn't proc. Or like I said, you could just be doing more damage, or maybe it's because you want to heal, or maybe you're benefiting from both healing your own Pokemon and doing damage. We'll see Monkey Dory plus Dark Energy slotted into a lot of decks for this ability. Dusknoir, and by extension Dusclops, both with the abilities Cursed Blast. Of course, Dusclops does it for 5 damage counters, but Dusknoir's Cursed Blast allows you to knock itself out and put 13 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So this is a really strong ability, and one that you really want to know about before entering the competitive field, because the Cursed Blast ability can knock out one of your Pokemon or damage one of your Pokemon just in the middle of your opponent's turn. It's not even their attack. What it can also do is force you to take a prize card by knocking out their own Pokemon, and that can proc effects like Counter Catcher, or make an Iono more impactful, or make Charizard EX's Burning Darkness attack do more damage because now you've taken another prize card. So if you see a Duskull on your opponent's bench, you know that it can evolve into a Dusclops or Dusknoir, which can do very scary things. So that's important to keep in mind. Next is Blood Moon Ursaluna EX. This is a huge basic Pokemon with 260 health and has the ability Seasoned Skill, which says the Blood Moon attack used by this Pokemon costs 1 colorless less for each prize card your opponent has taken. So Blood Moon does 240 for 5 energy, and next turn this Pokemon can attack. That's a pretty fair energy cost since Blood Moon Ursaluna is a basic Pokemon and it has 260 health and it's colorless, so you could use any type of energy towards this attack cost. But what really makes this a great card in the metagame is the ability Seasoned Skill. So as your opponent takes prize cards, your Blood Moon attack will cost less and less to use, even costing 0 energy if your opponent has taken 5 prize cards. So this is a card to be on the lookout for. As the game goes on, this Blood Moon attack becomes easier to use, and it also is threatening on a 260 health Pokemon, which not all decks can just immediately take care of. Then we have Pheasantipede EX with the ability Flip the Script. I actually rated this card, I believe, as the #1 card of 2024 in my 2024 best cards video earlier this year, because the ability Flip the Script is just so incredible. So flip the script once a turn. If any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you may draw 3 cards, and of course you can't use more than one of them a turn. And it has the Cruel Arrow attack, which can be usable sometimes to do 100 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So the flip the script ability is so important because even if your opponent uses Iono to get rid of your hand, or Unfair Stamp to get rid of your hand, and then takes a knockout on your Pokemon in the active or wherever, if any of your Pokemon were knocked out, even if they were knocked out by something like Dusknoir's Cursed Blast or Monkey Dory's Adrenabrain, it doesn't just have to be knocked out by damage. It's just if any of your Pokemon were knocked out, you may draw 3 cards. So this allows you to rebuild your hand after being knocked out. Pheasantipede EX is also great because it's a basic Pokemon. It's fairly healthy with 210 HP. And you can place it down preemptively to prepare for needing to rebuild your hand. So Pheasantipede EX is a card you're going to see in almost every type of deck. Very, very strong. And last in our cards to know section, which is completely made up of Pokemon, by the way, because we're going to go through other sections of other types of cards. These are all considered wall cards. They are considered wall cards because they have some sort of ability that makes them act as a sort of wall or an impenetrable force that certain types of Pokemon are not going to be able to get through. So we're starting with Milotic EX, the ability Sparkling Scales. Prevent all damage and effects of attacks from your opponent's Tera Pokemon done to this Pokemon. So you'll see on the Pokemon to the right of Milotic Farigiraf, it has that Tera tag. So any Pokemon that has that Tera tag that also says this Pokemon can't be damaged on the bench, those Pokemon with Tera tags cannot damage Milotic and cannot even affect them with attacks. So something like Dragapult EX's Phantom Dive's damage counters, those would not affect Milotic, and the damage in the active would not affect Milotic. And then Milotic does come with an attack, Hypno Splash. It does 160, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. So that ability Sparkling Scales, if you're playing a deck that champions a Tera Pokemon, you're going to need to be aware of this Milotic EX and think about, do you have a way to get around this ability, or are you just going to concede the game if you ever come up against this Milotic? Next is Farigiraf EX. It has the ability Armor Tail. Prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon EX. So this would be a very annoying card to come up against if you're playing something like Raging Bolt Ogerpon, because Raging Bolt and Ogerpon are both basic Pokemon EX. And then it has the Dirty Beam attack that does 160 and 30 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Next is Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX. It has the ability Cornerstone Stance. Prevent all damage from attacks done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon that have an ability. So now it's only damage, whereas Milotic EX is damage and effects. But there are a lot of strong Pokemon that have abilities, like Teal Mask Ogerpon EX and Farigiraf EX right next to us, and Charizard EX. So the Cornerstone Stance is a very unique walling ability that only stops Pokemon that have an ability. But notably, Cornerstone Mask comes with the Demolish attack that does 140, and it goes through effects. So although this is a Tera Pokemon, Demolish would deal 140 damage to Milotic. Although this is a basic EX Pokemon, it would deal 140 damage to Farigiraf, because Demolish says that this attack's damage is not affected by weakness, resistance, or, importantly, any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. And last here with the walls is Mimikyu with the ability Safeguard. Prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. Of course, the Pokemon V doesn't matter anymore because all Pokemon V are rotated out of standard format as of March 27th, I believe, on PTCG Live, and April 10th or 11th in real life tournaments. I believe I have those dates right, or if it's not correct, then it's very similar. So Mimikyu, a single prize Pokemon that can wall out Pokemon EX and has the Ghost Eye attack that does 7 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Next, we're going to move on to the Ace Specs. So Ace Specs are cards that come along with this rule that says you may only play one Ace Spec in your deck. So it's not just one copy of an Ace Spec card. You have to choose between all of the Ace Specs that exist. So I've collected the 10 most used Ace Specs here, and we're going to go over them quickly so you know what kind of Ace Specs to expect that could be possible, because these cards have very high powered effects to them because you can only play one of them in your deck. So first is Hero's Cape, which is pretty simple. It's a tool card that says the Pokemon this card is attached to gets plus 100 HP. Next is Secret Box. Secret Box is an item, and you can play this card and discard 3 other cards from your hand to search for an item, a tool, a supporter, and a stadium. Unfair Stamp is an item that says you can only use this card if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn. And it says that each player shuffles their hand into their deck, then you draw 5 and your opponent draws 2. So it's a very powerful disruption, and it can also be seen as a way to draw cards. It's like a shuffle draw 5 for yourself, and it's on an item, which is incredibly powerful. Precious Trolley is an item card that reads, search your deck for any number of basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. So this is very strong for decks that need a wide bench setup. Maybe they're trying to set up multiple different evolution Pokemon or multiple different basic tech Pokemon. Whatever it is, Precious Trolley can search for as many Pokemon as your bench has room for and bench them all. Similar but with energy is Energy Search Pro. Search your deck for any number of basic energy cards of different types. Reveal them and put them into your hand. So you'll mostly just see this included in Gholdengo decks, and those decks will play one of each type of energy, so their Energy Search Pro has the potential to get the maximum value of searching for every type of energy out of the deck, put them into your hand, and then Gholdengo does more damage for every energy you discard from your hand. Brilliant Blender is an item card that says search your deck for up to 5 cards and discard them. Now this might seem like a weird card, but especially one to choose as your Ace Spec, but there are some decks that specifically want cards in the discard pile. Like Ceruledge EX wants energy cards in the discard pile, Gardevoir EX wants psychic energies in the discard pile, an Ancient Box deck might want some more ancient Pokemon in the discard pile, so it does definitely have its uses. Maximum Belt is a tool card that says attacks used by this Pokemon, the Pokemon this card is attached to, do 50 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon EX. So if your deck is struggling to hit certain numbers that are important in the meta, certain thresholds of HP that you need to reach to knock out those Pokemon, then Maximum Belt can certainly help with that. Sparkling Crystal is one of my favorites. It's a Pokemon tool that says when the Tera Pokemon this card is attached to uses an attack, that attack costs 1 energy less. And the energy that it costs less can be of any type. So this is not just reducing the energy cost by a colorless. It's reducing the energy cost by whichever energy type you need it to be reduced by. So this is an incredibly strong card only for Tera Pokemon. Next is Scoop Up Cyclone. It simply lets you put one of your Pokemon and all attached cards into your hand. So this is good for decks that have high HP Pokemon, so you can pick them up before they're knocked out, and for Pokemon that have reusable effects that you want to play back down to reuse their effects. And lastly on this slide is Prime Catcher. Switch in one of your opponent's benched Pokemon to the active, and then you switch your active Pokemon with one of your benched. So it's a spiritual reprint of the Guzma supporter card, but what's important here is it's bringing up one of your opponent's Pokemon like a boss's orders would, but on an unconditional item card. So this Prime Catcher was originally one of the most played. It was very, very strong, but now we have a larger collection of A-specs to choose from. So Prime Catcher is still played, Unfair Stamp is still played, two of the earlier A-specs and the early popular A-specs, but we have a nice collection of A-specs now that different archetypes are wanting different things out of their A-spec slot. Next, we have some popular tools to know about. So Bravery Charm is a tool card that says the basic Pokemon this is attached to gets plus 50 HP. Then we have some Technical Machines. Technical Machines will give the Pokemon it's attached to the printed attack on the Technical Machine. So these are really, really cool. Technical Machine Turbo Energize gives you the Turbo Energize attack. For 1 colorless, search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards and attach them to your benched Pokemon in any way you like. Evolution gives you the Evolution attack. Choose up to 2 of your benched Pokemon and then evolve them from your deck. This is a really strong one. And then Technical Machine De-Evolution. It gives you the attack De-Evolution for 1 colorless. Devolve each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon by putting the highest stage evolution card on it into your opponent's hand. Then we have Defiance Band, which says if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, the attacks of the Pokemon this card is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Counter Gain, which says if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, attacks used by the Pokemon this card is attached to costs 1 colorless energy less. Rescue Board, the retreat cost of the Pokemon this card is attached to is 1 colorless less. If that Pokemon's remaining HP is 30 or less, it has no retreat cost. People often miss that secondary effect on Rescue Board. XP Share, when your active Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, you may move a basic energy from that Pokemon to the Pokemon this card is attached to. Do note that it has to be your active Pokemon that's knocked out by damage from an attack. So there are some specific wordings here with the XP share that nerf it a little bit. So if it's your benched Pokemon that gets knocked out, EXP share does not toss an energy over to the Pokemon that EXP share is attached to, right? If your active Pokemon is knocked out by damage counters or by a special condition, EXP share will not proc for those either. And also note, you're not putting EXP share on the Pokemon that gets knocked out. You're putting EXP share on one of your benched Pokemon. So when your active gets knocked out, it can receive energy from it. Binding Mochi is a tool card that says attacks used by the poisoned Pokemon this card is attached to do 40 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. This will usually be paired with Brute Bonnet, which brings us to Ancient Booster Energy Capsule. This Booster Energy Capsule says that the ancient Pokemon this is attached to gets plus 60 health and recovers from all special conditions and can't be affected by any special conditions. But this capsule card is also part of Brute Bonnet's ability that says if Brute Bonnet has specifically this capsule attached to it, you may poison both active Pokemon. And that's where it combines with Binding Mochi to poison your own Pokemon so you can do more damage. Next are some staple supporter cards to know about. So On the left, we have support kind of supporters that are going to either draw you cards or search you for cards. Professor's Research, discard your hand, draw 7. That's a staple effect. Iono, each player shuffles their hand and puts it on the bottom of the deck, and then they draw cards equal to the amount of prize cards they have remaining. And then Arvin, search your deck for an item card and a tool card. On the right, we have some utility supporters. Boss's Orders, which is a very aggressive supporter to bring up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon into their active spot. Professor Tauros, that can pick up one of your Pokemon, but you do have to discard all cards that were attached to it. And Crispin, search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards of different types, reveal them, and put one of them into your hand, attach the other to one of your Pokemon. So an important note about how Crispin works: if there's only one basic energy type in your deck, you're forced to put that one basic energy type into your hand, and then there's no other energy to attach to one of your Pokemon. So make sure you're running multiple types of energies, make sure you're running maybe a Super Rod to put them back into the deck, and enough counts of multiple types of energies so Crispin will be able to get 2 different energies from your deck to get that energy acceleration and the energy to hand, which you could then attach if you want to. And finally, staple item cards. So we have some great search cards available in the format: Nest Ball to get basic Pokemon, Ultra Ball to get any Pokemon, and Buddy Buddy Poffin to search for 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them directly onto your bench. We also have Terra Orb, which can search directly for a Terra Pokemon, and Earthen Vessel, which can search for basic energies. And do note that cards like Earthen Vessel and Ultra Ball, sometimes their cost, which Ultra Ball you have to discard 2 cards from your hand to search for a Pokemon, and Earthen Vessel you have to discard a card from your hand to search for 2 basic energies. Sometimes that cost of discarding a card can actually synergize and be a positive effect if you want cards in your discard pile for the deck archetype you're playing. Pokegear allows you to look at the top 7 cards of your deck and get a supporter from there and put it into your hand. Counter Catcher becomes a boss's orders on an item, but only if your opponent has less prize cards than you, only if you're losing in the prize trade. Super Rod can shuffle up to 3 in combination of Pokemon and basic energy from your discard pile to your deck. Night Stretcher can put a Pokemon or basic energy directly from discard pile into your hand. Rare Candy can allow one of your basic Pokemon to evolve directly into a Stage 2 Pokemon from your hand, although you can't use this card during your first turn or on a basic Pokemon that was just put into play this turn. Switch is a very simple effect that allows you to switch your active with one of your benched Pokemon. And then Pal Pad, which allows you to shuffle up to 2 supporter cards from your discard pile into your deck. So throughout all of these staple cards and cards you need to know that we've just went through, if you were to play a tournament, I'd imagine you'd see most, if not all, of the cards that we talked about, except maybe some of the more niche A-spec cards. Now we're finally going to get into the post-rotation standard format metagame. So here we have the tournament results from Champions League Fukuoka, which occurred on February 15th and had 5,000 players in the Masters division. So Japan started their post-rotation format a few months ahead of us, which they usually do start in January, I believe. And we'll see this tournament had a lot of wall-style decks in it. You see those 4 Milotic Farigiraf decks. The Feraligatr deck that ended up winning the event played a 2-2 line of Milotic in it. And also the 10th place Tera Box played a 1-1 line of Farigiraf. And we can't forget that 3rd place Blissey deck that played Milotic Farigiraf and Cornerstone in it. So we're going to be looking at deck lists for all of these archetypes today, but that's just a little view of what did well at Japan's first massive post-rotation format tournament. And you could check these results out on limitlesstcg.com. And then we also have a quick look at the meta share from City Leagues, which are the equivalent to Japanese League Cups. And here we have the results of 193 City Leagues between February 17th and March 9th, which is when they were playing after Champions League Fukuoka and before their next set Heat Wave Arena came out. So you'll see in the top there, you got Dragapult EX and then Noctowl Tera Box, both taking up well over 10% of the top 16 and the top 8 of City League events. And also over 10%, but just slightly, is Archaludon and Raging Bolt. And then just under 10%, we have Gholdengo and Charizard. So you can pause here and take a look at this meta if you want, but we're going to move on to the next part, which is going to be, we're finally getting into the deck lists. So we're going to look at 4 different types of archetypes today, and I've categorized them between tier S and tier 3. So please do note that tier 3 does not mean it is a bad deck. This is a tier that is in a vacuum of only the decks that we are looking at today. So none of the decks on this video are necessarily bad. They are just not as good as the best decks. So tier S, these decks are going to be very popular and very good. Tier 1 will be popular and good. Tier 2 are present in the meta. And tier 3 is a known archetype, but it is unpopular. The tier S decks, which are expected to be very successful and very popular, are Tera Box and Dragapult. So we will first cover Tera Box. We already know about this Noctowl Jewel Seeker ability that I talked about. It's very, very strong. And you'll see some of the Tera Pokemon that are going to be commonly included in Tera Box here. Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. With 210 HP, it's a grass Pokemon with the Teal Dance ability. This Teal Dance ability is really strong. You can attach a basic energy card from your hand to this Pokemon. That does not count as your energy attachment. And if you attach an energy to a Pokemon in this way, draw a card. So you get an energy onto the board and you get to draw a card. Getting the energy onto the board can be important for a couple of reasons. One, you're going to play Energy Switch, which can switch that energy off to a different Pokemon. And two, Teal Mask Ogerpon EX has a pretty decent attack itself, which is especially good if your opponent has Pokemon that are weak to grass type or Pokemon that use a lot of energy to do their attacks. We already talked about Wellspring, but it's a very strong card, especially for knocking out 2 smaller Pokemon to take 2 prize cards, or to retreat lock with Sob. And then Pikachu EX, I started talking about its Resolute Heart ability, which is strong, but it also has the Topaz Bolt attack that does 300 damage. So this is what my 56 card skeleton looks like for Tera Box. And essentially what I mean by that is these are the 56 cards that I currently expect to see in just about every Tera Box deck. There's not too much room for adding in a whole lot of different cards, but there are a lot of cards you could put in with those remaining 4 slots. So don't think that this deck is anywhere near perfected yet. I don't think this deck is perfected yet, but I do think that you will see these 56 cards in most of the Tera Box deck lists. And over on the right, we have the cards that you can include in those 4 slots. Cards like Terapagos EX, which will give you another Tera Pokemon with a colorless attack, Unified Beatdown, 30 damage for each of your benched Pokemon, so that caps out at 240 if you have a full bench of 8 with Area 0 Underdepths. The Stadium card, which allows you to have a bench of 8 as long as you have a Tera Pokemon in play. This Japanese tool that we have on the possible includes, that's Lily's Clefairy's or Lily's Pearl, which says if it's attached to a Lily's Pokemon, that Pokemon is worth 1 less prize card when knocked out by damage from an attack. And the other cards here in the possible includes are things that we've already covered. So this is a full 60 card list example for Tera Box. This is what I'd say the plain or vanilla style of Tera Box will look like. And then we also have a version with Cornerstone Ogerpon, so that you have a bit of an answer to cards like Milotic EX and against Farigiraf EX that would otherwise be really annoying for this deck to deal with. Next, we have Dragapult EX. So Dragapult EX, really strong. Phantom Dive attack does 200 damage and puts 6 damage counters on your opponent's benched Pokemon in any way you like. So it's a really efficient placing of damage. 200 to the active, 6 on the bench. So you can really mix and match where those placements go turn to turn based on how you're planning to take your prize cards. And then, of course, things like Dusknoir, Dusclops, Monkey Dory, and Hawlucha can also help with that damage counter placement. Very important, I show Dracloak here as well, the pre-evolution for Dragapult, the stage 1, because it has the Recon Directive ability. Once a turn, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand, put the other card on the bottom of the deck. So Dracloak is really important because without Dracloak, Dragapult EX would not be nearly as strong as it is, because it's really important for stage 2 Pokemon to have a somewhat useful stage 1 or basic pre-evolution most of the time to give you some value in the early game and give you a reason to evolve your other Dreepies if you already have a Dragapult EX. So that Recon Directive really gives you support throughout the game. And then the 2 main A-specs we'll see included in Dragapult decks are Unfair Stamp or Sparkling Crystal. And then we'll typically also see a decision between including Munkidori and a Dark Energy or including Hawlucha, because both can help you place extra damage on the board. We also have a skeleton for Dragapult. I've only made the skeletons for the tier S decks today, so you can see kind of what I think should kind of auto be included, and then all the cards you can decide between. So here we have a 51 card skeleton for Dragapult Dusknoir. You could also argue taking out the 2/1/2 line of Dusknoir for the skeleton, and then we would have a 46 card skeleton if we took those 5 cards out. But then we have the A-spec to decide between, Munkidori or Hawlucha to decide between. We do see some lists play Bravery Charm to protect their Duskulls, or they just play a third Duskull. If you're not playing Sparkling Crystal, you'll usually be playing Crispin to have an energy acceleration in the deck. And then there's a Brock Scouting is a new supporter card that allows you to search for either 2 basic Pokemon or 1 evolution. And then there's Jacques, which allows you to search for 2 evolutions. So we'll also see players deciding between these 2 supporters in their Dragapult decks. Here I have an example of Dragapult Crystal, and this one I've already featured on the channel, I believe. I'm really aiming for consistently getting a turn 2 Dragapult and having those 3 rare candies and the Terra Orb help with that. So not a lot of bells and whistles here, just trying to be consistent. That's the reason I'm also going for the Hawlucha here instead of Munkidori plus Dark, because Munkidori plus Dark is just another combo of pieces you have to find. And then we have the Dragapult Stamp version. So you'll see in this version, I'm playing the 2 Crispins to make up for not playing the Sparkling Crystal. And because of Crispin, I'm also trying the Munkidori Dark Energy in here because Crispin helps make that more feasible to set up. And then the last Dragapult variant here I'm going to show. This one I wouldn't necessarily pair into the tier S variants of Dragapult. I think this one's more experimental, but it is a variant of Dragapult at the end of the day that includes a 4 copy of Iron Thorns EX. Iron Thorns EX has the initialization ability that says if this Pokemon's in the active, all rule box Pokemon except for future Pokemon have no abilities. So this is essentially the best TM Evo build of Dragapult I could come up with, where we're planning to go turn 1 Arven for Precious Trolley plus Evo, Trolley for a bunch of Dreepies, and then use TM Evo to evolve up into Dracloaks and get your board set up. And meanwhile, you have Iron Thorns in the active, which can do the Volt Cyclone attack, swinging for 140. Notably, that can knock out a Wellspring because Wellspring is weak to lightning. And then you also can send those energies back to your Dragapult or your Cornerstone or your Lily's Clefairy. Next, we're looking at the Tier 1 decks. These are expected to be successful and popular, so just a tiny bit of a notch under the Tier S decks. And I'll also say that the Tier S decks, I wouldn't be surprised if one of them fall down to Tier 1, either based on being countered or, you know, the way the meta shapes out, if it doesn't have as good of matchups, or another deck comes out of nowhere and that could shake up the meta. So these tier 1 decks are just slightly under the tier S decks, but they are still expected to be successful and popular. We have in this section we'll be talking about Gholdengo, Archaludon, and Raging Bolt. But first, I want to ask, do you want to be a better player? Do you want to be winning your league challenges and league cups, maybe even go to the world championships? Do you want to learn decision-making skills like sequencing, metagaming skills like how to calculate a matchup spread for your deck and how to use that for deck selection? building confidence and learning what a competence confidence loop is. Well, you can do all of that with my competitive Pokemon TCG Masterclass, which includes over 6 hours of video and article content. Here are just a few reviews from my students, and I really want to give a shout out here to Preston at the top. He says, I went from 4-3 regional records to day 2ing regional after regional. He really is, and I feel like every other week he's sending me a picture of his next champion mat from a League Cup. He has come such a long way since coaching with me, and I think he is positioned to get his first ever World Championships invite this season. So shouts out to all of my reviews here from the students, but extra shout out to Preston, who has made leaps and bounds this season. So I offer 3 different educational services. My masterclass, which covers every fundamental skill, including how cards work together, decision making, deck building, tournament prep, and free updates forever, all in one course. I have a new members only community, which will supply you with updated deck lists, meta predictions, and even a monthly live class, which this month is going to be, or for April's monthly live class is going to be a post rotation and Atlanta Regionals prep class. And then I also offer one-on-one sessions where we can work on your gameplay, play against each other while I critique your skills in live time, deck help, working on advanced skills, and personalized teaching. I don't mention this throughout the video anywhere else, but I do have a master's degree in psychology, and I have an extensive history of teaching and directing. And you'll see here a quick review that says this session was great. My son learned things to help him grow even in this first session. So if you have any questions, check out my Metafy page or message me on Discord about my educational services for the Pokemon TCG. And now let's get back to the video covering Gholdengo EX. So Gholdengo EX is actually a really, really scary card and a really scary deck in the metagame. And that's because its Make It Rain effect, or its Make It Rain attack, I should say, costs 1 metal energy and has an unlimited damage cap. It does 50 damage times the number of basic energy cards you discard from your hand. And this is where that Energy Search Pro comes in. You can include all the different types of energies in your deck, and Energy Search Pro basically just finds you a one-hit knockout automatically. And not to mention, Gholdengo has built-in consistency with the ability Coin Bonus. Once during your turn, you may draw a card. If this Pokemon is in the active spot, draw 1 more card. So you'll notice that a lot of times it takes having an ability like this to thrust a Pokemon into the higher tiers, or put a deck up into the higher tiers. Like I mentioned with the Dracloak ability on Dragapult, like I mentioned with the Teal Dance ability on Teal Mask, like I'm showing here now with the Gholdengo EX. When you have a strong Pokemon that can also draw cards, that is a recipe for success. So here's the first version of Gholdengo EX we'll look at. This one's using the Dunsparce and Scizor. So the Dunsparce has the runaway draw ability that lets you draw 3 cards and shuffle itself into the deck. So a little bit of extra burst draw support in addition to the Gholdengo coin bonuses. And then you also have Scizor with the Punishing Scissors attack that does 10 damage plus 50 more damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play that has an ability. So that is the card that's going to let you get through things like Cornerstone or Mimikyu that normally Gholdengo EX would not be able to attack into. And then we have just the Dunsparce version of Gholdengo EX using the new Dunsparce EX as well. And that Dunsparce EX is going to allow you to hit through some walls as well. So that first attack is going to do, for 1 energy, 60 damage for each EX your opponent has in play. And the second attack for 3 energy does 150, but it goes through all effects. And then the last Gholdengo EX deck list I have here is Gholdengo with Dragapult, which does look like a funny combination of cards that don't really do the same things. But you're doubling down on stage 1 Pokemon that help you draw cards. So now you both have Gholdengo and Dracloak. But you also have Dragapult, which can hit through Cornerstone, which Gholdengo can't. And it has a very different kind of attack and also higher HP. So If you're playing against single prize Pokemon and Make It Rain is an inefficient attack to use, then maybe Phantom Dive is a better attack to use in those situations. So this is a really cool and adaptive deck that I think is pretty strong, but people might stay away from just because it looks weird to combine Gholdengo and Dragapult into the same deck. Next is Archaludon. Archaludon is a beast of a Pokemon card, 300 HP at just a stage 1, and it has the ability Assemble Alloy. When you evolve this Pokemon, you can attach up to 2 basic Metal Energy cards from your discard pile to your Metal Pokemon in any way you like. And it has the Metal Defender attack that does 220, and next turn this Pokemon has no weakness, so it's pretty crazy. It has 300 health, it sets itself up with its own ability, and then its attack removes its weakness next turn, which is the only downside to its high HP, is that it's weak to fire, so you can capitalize on that, but no more weakness after you use Metal Defender. And what's really cool about this deck, I think there's a lot of cool things about Archaludon actually, but one of them is the Relicanth card here with the ability Memory Dive. Each of your evolved Pokemon can use any attack from its previous evolutions. Great card to have in the game to make things like this happen, where you actually get to use Duraludon's Raging Hammer attack from Archaludon. So if Archaludon gets hit for 280 damage and you have this Relicanth, you can copy Raging Hammer from Duraludon and that would do 360 damage. So really cool effect there on the Relicanth. Black Belt's Training is a way to get your damage up a little bit. Professor Tauros is great for healing and reusing Assemble Alloy. And then that new Hops Zacian card is going to be a popular way to attack into Cornerstone Ogerpon because Archaludon has an ability so it can't hit Cornerstone. But Zacian's second attack that does 240 and then can't use it again next turn, that will just go right through a Cornerstone Ogerpon and take 2 prizes. So I actually have a lot of deck lists today for Archaludon EX. This first one is a Poison variant, which uses the Pecharunt that says as long as his Pokemon's in the active, put 5 more damage on your opponent's poison Pokemon between turns. And it also has Brute Bonnet that poisons both active Pokemon. So you could potentially win on like turn 1 going first if you activate Toxic Powder and put the Pecharunt with Toxic Subjugation into the active and use that Perilous Jungle Stadium that says poisoned Pokemon take 2 more damage between turns. So you could do up to 80 damage or 8 damage counters with poison on just turn 1 going first. But the poison stuff helps throughout the game because you can also poison your own Archaludon and attach Binding Mochi. So now it's doing 260. And then if you have the Perilous Jungle, they're taking 3 from poison between turns. So that means you're doing 290 essentially. This will also help you get through something like Pikachu EX's Resolute Heart, because if you hit them for 220, then they survive with 10 health. The poison will tick between turns and knock them out. Then we have a build of Archaludon using Hops Double. Hops Double is a pretty strong card, but it's also pretty simple. It just says when you evolve it from Hops Wooloo, you get to use a Boss's Orders effect. Bring up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active. So this can be very strong because Archaludon EX's 220 damage is very good at taking out bench-sitting Pokemon like Pheasantipity, like Squawkabilly, like Tealmask Ogerpon. Just bring them up and knock them out for 2 prizes. That's what you're trying to do with this version of the deck. Then we have Hops, Zacian, and Cram, a little more focused onto the Hops, Zacian in this version of the Archaludon EX deck. You'll see that we're playing 3 of Hops Choice Band, which says that Hops Pokemon attacks cost 1 colorless less and do 30 more damage. Hops Snorlax also lets your Hops Pokemon do 30 more damage. And Postwick, the Stadium card here, also says your Hops Pokemon do 30 more damage. So that means that Hops Zacian EX's second attack can go up to 330 damage for just 3 energy with these buffs that you have from the Hops cards. And then Hops Cramorant can do 120, or with all the buffs 210 for just 1 energy, or free with Hops Choice Band, but it can only use that attack if your opponent's at 3 or 4 prize cards. And then finally, probably my favorite version of Archaludon EX so far, which is kind of my own creation here, using Monkey Dory and Calamitous Snowy Mountain to boost your damage output and get through things like Pikachu EX, right? So Calamitous Snowy Mountain says whenever a player attaches an energy card from their hand to one of their basic non-water Pokemon, put 2 damage on that Pokemon. So we can purposely damage our own Pokemon so that we have damage to move with Adrenaline Brain. That's kind of what we're doing here with the Calamitous Snowy Mountain Monkey Dory combo. So this might not prove to be the absolute best way to play Archaludon. We're going to have to wait and see. But for now, it's a pretty cool combination of cards that I'm enjoying. Next, to round out the tier 1 decks, we have Raging Bolt EX. So Raging Bolt EX, much like Gholdengo EX, has an unlimited amount of damage potential with Bellowing Thunder, which does 70 damage for each basic energy that you discard from your Pokemon in play. So some popular numbers you'll be hitting with this is discarding 4 energy from play will do 280, discarding 5 energy from play will do 350. That will typically take care of just about anything your opponent has on the board. And the way we're getting those energies onto the board are with Professor Sada's Vitality. Choose up to 2 of your ancient Pokemon and attach a basic energy from your discard pile to each of them. And if you attach any energy in this way, draw 3 cards. And also, of course, with Teal Mask Ogerpon EX, which you can accelerate an energy from hand and then draw a card. Here we have an example list for Raging Bolt EX, and Raging Bolt EX is going to be using that Fan Rotom plus Hoot Hoot Noctowl engine now. It lost Pokestop, it lost Radiant Greninja's concealed cards. So we do have some ground to make up for in ways of how are we going to draw cards with this deck. But now we can actually search cards with this deck thanks to Noctowl's Jewel Seeker and already playing Ogerpon, a Tera Pokemon in the deck. We have the Noctowl Jewel Seeker to go and search out the specific cards we need. So maybe making Raging Bolt a more consistent and reliable deck than ever, because it used to just be trying to draw into the cards it needed. Now you can actually go and search for them. However, that might make Raging Bolt slightly slower because Noctowl, you can't be using that until turn 2. Next, we're moving on to the tier 2 section. These decks will be expected to be somewhat present in the metagame and can circumstantially succeed. As we saw, 4 of these decks were in the top 16 of the Champions League Fukuoka results. Feraligatr got first. Charizard and Flareon were both in the top 16. And then Walls had appearances in both top 4 and top 8. My bad, actually 5 of them were there, and Zoroark was also in the top 16. So you'll see that these decks, just because I'm not putting them in tier S or tier 1, they are still completely viable decks to play. Let's start with Feraligatr. So Feraligatr is such a cool deck. It really feels like your whole team of Pokemon are kind of working together with this deck. And it is also cool because Relicanth turns Feraligatr into a Pokemon card that has an ability and 3 attacks. Remember that ability, Memory Dive. We talked about this for the Archaludon deck. It lets your evolved Pokemon use attacks from its previous evolutions. So Feraligatr, let's start there. It has the ability Torrential Heart. Once during your turn, you may put 5 damage counters on this Pokemon. If you do, attacks used by this Pokemon do 120 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So that 5 damage counters that you put onto the Feraligatr is cool because you get to move them off with Monkey Dory's Adrenaline Brain. And then you can choose between Giant Wave, which after Torrential Heart will do 280, Reverse Thrust, which will do 150, or Big Bite, which will do 130. Sometimes you might even want a Big Bite for just 10 damage if you're retreat locking your opponent and you don't want to do too much damage to them. You just want to keep their Pokemon stuck in the active. And then also you have Luxurious Cape here, which gives the Pokemon that's attached to that doesn't have a rule box plus 100 health. Although if it's knocked out by damage from an attack, that player takes 1 more prize card. So this boosts Feraligatr up to being a 280 HP Pokemon with an ability and 3 attacks. And we also in this deck use Milotic EX and Mimikyu EX, which are both great Pokemon choices to switch into when you use the Croconaws Reverse Thrust attack. So this is what a list looks like for Feraligatr, using a 4-3-3 line of the Feraligatr and then the other Pokemon I mentioned. And like I said, it really feels like a whole team of Pokemon working together to make this deck work. And this is a perfect example of the kind of deck that would want to play Precious Trolley, because you want to set up multiple Totodiles, multiple Monkey Dories, you want your Relicanth, and then you also want a wall like Mimikyu or the Milotic. Next is Flareon Noctowl. So Flareon EX is a stage 1 Tera EX Pokemon that has the Burning Charge attack. For 2 energy, it does 130, and search your deck for up to 2 basic energies and attach them to one of your Pokemon. And then it also has the Carnelian attack that does 280. Now what's cool about this Flareon EX and all Evolution EXs is that you have 2 different EVs to choose from. So you have the non-EX EV, which says with the boosted evolution, as long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, it can evolve during your first turn or the turn you play it. So you could potentially use Burning Charge on turn 1 going second. And then EVEX, which is a Tera Pokemon, which is great if you need a basic Tera Pokemon in play for your Noctowl's ability. And it has the ability Rainbow DNA. This Pokemon can evolve into any Pokemon EX that evolves from Eevee if you play it on your hand to evolve this Pokemon. And it has to say that because Flareon EX, you'll see, says evolves from Eevee, not evolves from EVEX. So if EVEX did not have that ability, it would not be allowed to evolve into Flareon EX. So that ability is good because you can Burning Charge, attach energies to a benched EVEX, which will be protect on the bench from the Tera effect, and also has much higher HP than a regular EV, and then later evolve that EVEX into whichever evolution you want if you're playing multiple of them. So a couple cards to look at that you can include in your Flareon decks. You have Sylveon EX, which has 2 usable attacks, the Magical Charm that does 160, and then next turn the defending Pokemon does 100 less damage. So if your opponent switches out or evolves their Pokemon or whatever, that effect goes away. And the really cool part of Sylveon is Angelite. Choose 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon and shuffle them into your opponent's deck. Now you can't use Angelite turn after turn because it says if one of your Pokemon used Angelite last turn, this attack can't be used. But let's say your opponent has a Charizard and a Charmander and no other Charizard line on their board. Well, you could boss something up to the active to force their Charizard to the bench and then use Angelite to shuffle their Charizard and their Charmander into their deck. Now they have no attacker. You could do the same thing versus Dragapult, let's say. Just shuffle their Dragapult and their only Dracloak into the deck. Now they have no Dreepies, no Dracloak, no Dragapult. They're going to need another whole turn of setting those up. So very cool attack on the Sylveon. Leafeon EX was actually featured in the top 16 Fukuoka list of Flareon, using that Verdant Storm attack, 60 damage for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. That can be very good if your opponent has grass-weak Pokemon especially. And then the Moss Agate attack, which does 230, and it heals 100 damage from each of your benched Pokemon. So that could be very useful against damage spread strategies. And then this Tapu Koko EX, poor image of it. The English, I don't have a great scan for it yet. But it has, the reason this Tapu Koko EX could be included is because it is not a Tera Pokemon and it one-shots Milotic EX. So it's the perfect answer to knock out Milotic EXs on the other side. Also, it has free retreat, which isn't too bad. So here's a version that is just straight Flareon, trying to be consistent, trying to get that early Burning Charge, and then just sweep the board with a couple of Carnelian attacks. Also using Briar in here. Briar is a supporter card that says you can only use this Pokemon if your opponent has 2 prize cards remaining. And then during this turn, if one of your Tera Pokemon would knock out your opponent's active Pokemon, you get 1 more prize card. So you can actually win the game a little earlier with that Briar supporter. And then here's a version of Flareon Noctowl that is teching in the Sylveon EX, which I mentioned is a super cool choice of evolution because of that Angelite attack that can really disrupt your opponent's board. Next, we've got Charizard. So one of the big choices to make with Charizard is, are you going to pair it with Pidgeot EX or Noctowl or maybe even both. But let's talk about Charizard EX itself real quick. It is one of the strongest Pokemon cards ever printed. It has 330 health. It sets up itself or another Pokemon, or maybe even multiple Pokemon with its Infernal Rain ability. And then its Burning Darkness attack just gets stronger and stronger as the game goes on. And you could even force the Burning Darkness attack to get stronger by knocking out your own Pokemon like Dusclops or Dusknoir. So let's get into the deck lists for Charizard. First here we have a Charizard Pidgeot build. Like I mentioned, it's going to be using the Dusclops and Dusknoir because they pair so well with Charizard. And we're running 2 of the technical machine evolutions in here, so you can evolve your Charmanders up into Charmeleons, or your Pidgeys up into Pidgeotos, your Duskull up into Dusclops. And the main reason that Charizard Pidgeot is running a technical machine evolution build is because of the threat of Badoo item locking you out of rare candy. This deck used to just play 4 rare candies and go for turn 2 Candy Pidgeot, Candy Charizard, but that's less feasible now because of the threat of Badoo, and also because some cards like Luminion and Forest Stone that were very good at getting your combo pieces are no longer in the format. The ace spec of choice here is Hero's Cape, because it's going to make your Charizard EX have 430 health, which is just ridiculous. Next, we have a Charizard Noctowl Terapagos build, which this isn't exactly new. We've seen this kind of build pop up here and there, but it has never become the mainstream way to play Charizard EX. However, this was the only variant of Charizard EX in the top 16 of the Champions League Fukuoka over in Japan for their first major post-rotation tournament. So we could see this build finally becoming the main way to play Charizard. We'll have to see. However, this build might suffer to the Badoo item lock because its only way to get into Charizard is the rare candy. However, that's going to be really easy to find with Noctowl, and you do have some great ways to just quickly deal with a Badoo, like Fan Rotom's Assault Landing attack that does 70 for 1 energy as long as you have a Stadium in play, or even just using Terapagos' Unified Beatdown, or maybe even Charmander's Steady Fire Breathing. There's a lot of easy ways to knock out a Badoo, but you have to think about getting your Charizards into play even more against those kinds of decks, because you can't use your rare candies, which is exactly why the previous build was playing those TM Evos to get up into Charmeleon and then Charizard. And then this one's pretty similar, but it's Charizard Noctowl using the Wellspring and also Cornerstone, so including Water Energy and Fighting Energy, and using the Sparkling Crystal as the A spec, so you can play a more creative lineup of Pokemon. And you'll also see that this list is including a Charmeleon, so you can manually evolve up into Charizard EX even if you're under item lock or that you can't find your rare candies for some reason. Next, we're getting to the walls. Now, I did have a pretty large section at the beginning of the video talking about these wall cards, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. Let's just get into the deck list for it. So this is one of the deck lists that is from the top 16, top 4, top 8, somewhere in that range of the Champions League Fukuoka that we looked at. And remember, you could find those tournament results on limitlesstcg.com. This deck is just going to try to build whichever wall is best against the opponent, whether that's going to be a couple Milotic EXs, a couple Farigiraf EXs, or a Cornerstone Ogerpon. And you have Crispin as well as Turbo Energize to get those Pokemon set up with the amount of energy they need to use. And then one of the A specs we didn't mention, Pokevital A, is being used here. It's an item card that says heal 150 damage from one of your Pokemon, but this card can never be returned from the discard pile into your hand, which is what it says. But that's not really a big deal. It's just going to be a one-use item that heals 150. So that's really useful if your opponent's using their own Cornerstone to hit through one of your walls. You just completely heal a Cornerstone's Demolish away with this Pokevital A. Next is N's Zoroark. So N's Zoroark EX has the ability Trade, which is a very good effect. The old Zoroark GX had the same ability, and I used that card to get, I think, my entire Worlds 2018 invite, so I have some great memories with Zoroark. This one's not as good, but let's get into it. So the trade effect is discard a card, draw 2. That's awesome. You might know it from the old Zoroark GX's trade. You might know it from Curlia's Refinement. It's the same ability. And then its only attack, which this is what's kind of holding it back, it doesn't have an attack of its own. It has to choose one of your benched N's Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. And you really only have two great options for that, which is the Enstar Manatan. That's going to be the main attacker of this deck. And the main attack of that is Blaseball Cannon that does 90 damage, discard all energy from this Pokemon, and then do 90 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So it does 90-90. But it also has the backdraft attack that does 30 for each energy card in your opponent's discard pile. So that's actually really usable against something like Gholdengo EX or Ceruledge EX that have a ton of energy in their discard pile. The other Ends Pokemon you can copy is Ends Reshiram, which has a vanilla 170 attack that's fine, but it also has powerful rage. So if your Ends Zoroark gets hit, let's say they hit it for 200, your powerful rage attack, you're going to copy that to do 400 back. So powerful rage can actually end up being the strongest attack here to copy. It's just not always going to be usable because your opponent has to first play into it by damaging your Zoroark and not knocking it out. And then we have the Ends PP Up item. Attach one basic energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Ends Pokemon. So this is what the deck list is going to look like for this. We have the Pecharunt with the subjugating chain that can move one of your dark Pokemon into the active and then poison it. So that's why you see the Binding Mochi here. So you'll poison your Zoroark EX. You can also move it from the bench, which is great. So you can use the Ends PP Up to attach to your bench Zoroark, attach energy, attach Binding Mochi, subjugating chains it into the active. And now you're doing plus 40 damage because you're poisoned. And you'll also see reversal energy included. Reversal energy says if it's attached to a Pokemon, it provides colorless energy. However, if it's attached to a Pokemon without a rule box and you're behind on prizes, an evolution Pokemon without a rule box and you're behind on prizes, it actually provides 3 rainbow energy. So it provides the full energy cost for Enstar Manatan's second attack that does 90-90. And when you have to discard all energy for it, you're really only discarding this reversal energy. So it's a pretty sweet deal. And last for the tier 2 decks, we have Gardevoir EX. If Zoroark GX was my favorite deck from back in 2018 to get a Worlds invite, then Gardevoir was my favorite from the 2023-2024 season. The thing about Gardevoir, though, going into this post-rotation format is that it loses the Kirlia with Refinement. So now we don't have a Kirlia that we actively want to put into play. So Gardevoir is becoming a rare candy deck. We just want to go from Ralts to Gardevoir because there's no good Kirlia that supports our game plan. So Gardevoir EX, it is kind of a psychic toolbox because of the Psychic Embrace ability. As often as you like during your turn, you may attach a basic energy card from your discard to one of your psychic Pokemon. And if you've attached energy to a Pokemon in this way, put 2 damage on that Pokemon. You can't knock out your own Pokemon with this ability. So this works great with something like Drifloon. Drifloon's Balloon Blast says it does 30 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So if you accelerate 3 energy with Psychic Embrace, that puts 6 damage, and then your Balloon Blast is doing 180. If you put a Bravery Charm on Drifloon, that expands how much damage it can have, so its Balloon Blast can do even more damage. Similar with Screamtail, except it's on a 20x multiplier, and it can do the damage anywhere. It can swing that damage at the active, or it can swing that damage at one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, which is what it's more commonly used to do. And the 2 popular A-specs you'll see Gardevoir decks choosing between are Unfair Stamp or the Brilliant Blender to get Psychic Energy into the discard pile. Because like I said, we don't have concealed cards on Greninja to get energy in the discard pile, and we no longer have Refinement Kirlia to get energy into the discard pile. So this is roughly what a Gardevoir EX deck might look like in the 2025 post-rotation standard format. Like I said, we don't have a good Kirlia, but if we're against a Badoo item lock, we're going to want to get into our Kirlias to get into our Gardevoir, or maybe even we have a candied Gardevoir down, we can evolve the other Ralts into Kirlia so that if that first Gardevoir gets knocked out, we have an easier route into our next Gardevoir EX. As I mentioned, Bravery Charm is an important tool card typically for Gardevoir decks because it's essentially raising the damage output that your Drifloon and your Screamtail can do, but you can also protect your Pokemon with it. Maybe you want to protect a Badoo so your opponent's just not an Adrenabrain away from a prize card, or you want to Bravery Charm your Monkey Dory so it can't be Dusknoir sniped. So you can also use the Bravery Charms defensively. Moving into our last tier of deck archetypes today, Tier 3. These are expected to be an insignificant contribution to the metagame. However, they are still viable decks, and we even saw one of them, being Blissey, get 3rd place in the Champions League Fukuoka. Let's begin with Terapagos. This is going to be a Terapagos EX focused deck, using the Unified Beatdown attack as the main attack of the deck, which can go up to 240 using the Area 0 Underdepths, which allows you to have up to 8 Pokemon on your bench. And this is also going to be using the Bouffalant with Curly Wall. So you have to have 2 Bouffalants in play, but then your basic colorless Pokemon takes 60 less damage from attacks. So your Terapagos is going to be essentially needing to be hit for 290 damage to one-shot it when you have these Bouffalants in play. So here's what the deck list for it will look like. We're also playing Bravery Charm to bring that Terapagos up to needing 340 damage to one-shot it, using Scoop Up Cyclone and Tauros so you can even pick up a damaged Pokemon and play it back down, and then also using Monkey Dory to move damage off of your Terapagos that's tanking this damage onto your opponent's Pokemon to maybe take some mid-turn knockouts or help your Math for Unified Beatdown be able to knock out a Pokemon. And again, you'll see these Lily's Clefairy EXs tapped into a lot of deck lists because it's so good at knocking out Dragapults. Next is Froslass, which has a lot of things going on in it and a lot of cards I want to talk about here. So Froslass has the ability Freezing Shroud. During Pokemon Checkup, that's between turns, put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon that has an ability, both yours and your opponent's, except for any Froslass. So since Freezing Shroud is going to be doing damage to your own Pokemon with abilities as well, like your Monkey Dories, that actually creates damage for your Adrenabrains to move on to your opponent's Pokemon, which is a really cool interaction. Also, Froslass is not doing a lot of damage at one time, so you're going to want to prolong the game as long as possible. With cards like Badoo, Itchy Pollen, it does 10 damage in Item Lock, so your opponent's game is going to be slower if they can't use items. You can use Espather EX in the active, which has the Dazzling Gaze ability. As long as this Pokemon's in the active, attacks used by your opponent's active Pokemon cost 1 colorless more, so maybe they won't be able to attack, and that prolongs the game. We also have the new Maractus from Journey Together. It has the corner attack for just a colorless energy, 20 damage, and your opponent's defending Pokemon cannot retreat next turn. And if they manage to switch or Toro out of that and they knock out your Maractus, they take 6 damage counters for doing so, which is also synergistic with the Froslass strategy. We also have TMD Evolution, which can either slow your opponent down or devolve their high HP Pokemon into lower HP Pokemon, which then results in them being knocked out from the damage that has built up. And there's also Gravity Gemstone, which you could attach this to Badoo, counter catcher up a Pokemon that your opponent doesn't want in the active, make it have a higher retreat cost, and item lock them, so they can't even use a switch to get out of it while your Freezing Shroud damage builds up. So this can be a very, very cool deck. And this is what the deck list looks like for it. It is in tier 3 because it has lower damage output. It has a lot of things it wants to set up. And it's also trying to slow the opponent down. So if your opponent has a deck that is not so hurt by item lock, or it's not hurt by retreat lock, then or they don't play a lot of abilities for Freezing Shroud to be placing damage counters on, then this deck could easily have a bad time. Next is Blissey EX. So Blissey EX has pretty high HP for a stage 1, just like Archaludon, 300 health, and has the ability Happy Switch. Once a turn, you may move a basic energy from one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon, and then it also has the Return attack, which does 180, and you may draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. One of the coolest things to do with the Happy Switch ability is attach a Dark Energy to Monkey Dory to use its Adrenabrain ability, and then move that energy over to one of your Pokemon that need the energy to use their attack for the turn. So here we'll see the Walls style build of Blissey, which we saw in the 3rd place in the Champions League Fukuoka. And since they're only playing a 1-1 line of Farigiraf, a 1-1 line of Milotic, and 1 Cornerstone, you might think that they're going to prize some of their pieces. But to circumvent that, they're playing the exchange ticket item, which says count your prize cards, shuffle them up, put them at the bottom of your deck, and then put that many cards from the top of your deck into your prize cards. So it guarantees that whatever was in your prize card will now be in your deck, and cards from your deck will now be in your prize cards. So if you know that you prize a Girafarig and you need it to win this game because you need to wall out your opponent with Farigiraf, then you'll go ahead and Arven for exchange ticket to guarantee that Girafarig goes into your deck, and then you can go search it out from there. So the exchange ticket is kind of a finicky way to deal with the prizing, but I do think this deck is built pretty inconsistently, and they just came up against a lot of decks that could not deal with the walls. And then this is Blissey Pikachu, which is aiming to just use that Topaz Bolt attack a lot, doing 300 damage, but you do have to discard 3 energy to use it. But that's okay when you have the Blissey and Glass Trumpet to accelerate energy and then move it to your Pikachu EX. So this is definitely a more aggressive way to try to build Blissey. And using that Precious Trolley as the A-Spec, because you'll notice Chansey has 120 health, so something like Buddy Poffing can't get your Chanseys onto the board, so Precious Trolley is the best way to get multiple Chanseys and the other Pokemon that you want set up all at the same time. Next, we have Hops Zacian. Now, we did look at these cards previously in the Archaludon build, but this is going to be focused just on the Hops Pokemon. So we'll just take a quick look at here at what the cards do. Hops Zacian's Close Cleave is actually going to be the main attack of this deck that we're about to look at. So with all the damage buffs, Hops Snorlax, Hops Choice Band, Postwick, this Close Cleave is going to be free to use because of the Choice Band, and it's also going to do 120 to the active, then 30 to the bench. You'll also see that, like that Archaludon Monkey Dory list I showed, this deck is using the Calamitous Snowy Mountain plus Monkey Dory combo to make sure that there's damage on the board for your Adrenabrain ability to move, because you don't actually need energy on your Hops Zacian. Typically, the energy in this deck is going to be used on Monkey Dory for Adrenabrain, on Blood Moon Ursaluna for late game Blood Moons, and potentially even Snorlax as a single prize attacker when you're not on the correct prize cards to use Cramorant as your single prize attacker. Next, we have Ceruledge, which is a pretty straightforward deck. You're just going to try to get as many basic energies into your discard pile, or actually any energies for that case, which is why we have Brilliant Blender here, and then use the Abyssal Flames attack to do 30 damage plus 20 more for each energy in your discard pile. So if you get 10 energies in your discard pile, Abyssal Flames is swinging 230 for just one single energy. One of the main problems with Ceruledge is that it is a Tera Pokemon, and most Ceruledge decks aren't playing a secondary attacker, so you can easily just get walled out by a Milotic EX. But this is what a typical Ceruledge EX deck list is looking like in the Japan post-rotation format, using that Revavroom as sort of the draw support past turn 1, where you have Squawkabilly EX for your turn 1 draw, and then also have supplemental draw, of course, from Pheasantipity EX. But the Revavroom works because you're already playing so many energies that you'll typically have an energy to discard to then draw cards until you have 6 in your hand. And lastly, we're looking at Roaring Moon. So Roaring Moon EX has the ancient support surrounding it, but it also has 2 incredible attacks. So it has Frenzied Gouging, which straight up just knocks out your opponent's active Pokemon. And if your opponent's active Pokemon is knocked out, Roaring Moon does take 200 damage. And then it also has Calamity Storm that does 100 damage, plus you may discard a Stadium and play to do 120 more, which totals to 220. We have the Baby Roaring Moon that does Vengeance Fletching, 70 damage, plus 10 more for each Ancient card in your discard pile. Of course, we have Professor Sada's as our main energy acceleration, but you can also use Janine's Secret Art, which says choose up to 2 of your Dark Pokemon, search your deck for a basic Dark energy, and attach it to each of those Pokemon, then shuffle your deck, and your active Pokemon, if you attach energy to it, is now poisoned, which that can also work to your benefit with Binding Mochi. So this list is actually not going to be using Binding Mochi, but you can totally choose to tech it in, maybe cut one of the Lively Stadiums for an extra binding, for 1 Binding Mochi to pair with the Pecharunt and the Janine's Secret Art. But this is something like what a Roaring Moon EX deck might look like. Also using those Psychic energies for the Lily's Clefairy EX. Really good tech there to get through the Dragapult EXs, which would otherwise be a pretty hard matchup, because if you Frenzied Gouging to one-shot them, then they can take a 4-prize turn next turn because your Roaring Moon went down to 30 health remaining. And then you also have a Poison build here, which is using the Brute Bonnet and Pecharunt, similar to the way they were using it in the Archaludon EX build. However, again, not choosing to use the Binding Mochis here, using just 4 Ancient Booster Energy Capsules. And that is my complete metagame guide for the 2025 post-rotation standard format in the Pokemon trading card game. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in my educational services, such as one-on-one coaching, my complete fundamental skills masterclass, or my private community where I'm sharing deck lists, metagame predictions, and having discussions with the community, check out my Metafy link in the description down below. And you can find other ways to support me, like coupon codes and affiliate links, down in the description down below. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time
time here on Celio's Network.